continued after the group reached shore, and I observed a physical fight involving Nolan and multiple people. I also observed a young woman telling them to stop.
The most important piece of evidence in Nolan Wells's case may be a video nobody has publicly verified, because the woman who says it exists also says she saw a fight that other accounts never mention. If that recording carries a reliable timestamp, clearly identifies Nolan, and shows what she described, it could redraw the most contested 90 minutes in the case. If it does not, then one of the loudest new claims surrounding Nolan's death remains exactly that, a claim. The woman has not publicly identified herself. She said she was a passenger on another boat near Horn Island and saw an argument involving Nolan, several other people, and his phone. She said she heard Nolan demanding that his phone be returned. She said the argument continued after the group reached shore and became physical, with multiple people involved and a young woman telling them to stop. Then, by her own account, she left. She did not claim to see how Nolan entered the water. She did not claim to witness his death. She did not claim to know what happened after she moved away. That limit matters. The witness also said her husband had video footage. She described it as footage that did not show much, but that captured the argument and showed people upset with Nolan over a young woman. The problem is that an earlier message attributed to the same witness was narrower. In that message, she reportedly said she and her husband had seen an argument and warned one person that he could spend the rest of his life in prison. That message did not describe a physical fight. It did not establish an exact time. Brandon Tatum, who had interviewed several of Nolan's acquaintances, said he had not spoken directly with the person who sent the message. He treated it as something investigators should examine, but not as proof of how Nolan died. Defense attorney Philip Dubett went further. He said that if the woman had not turned the recording and her statement over to law enforcement, he would give the public claim no credibility. His first questions were practical. Is there a timestamp? How far away was the camera? Can the witness identify Nolan specifically? Had alcohol affected perception or memory? Those are not side issues. They decide whether a dramatic story becomes usable evidence. There is another problem. The physical description of a multi-person fight does not fit neatly with the forensic discussion presented in the case. Death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan said that a genuine fistfight often leaves contusions, abrasions, or injuries on the knuckles, hands, forearms, or face. He pointed to the second autopsy, which included sectioning of the face, and said the examiner did not record clear blunt force trauma of the type he would expect from sustained blows. Tatum made the same basic argument. Nancy Grace pushed back, pointing to discoloration at the back of Nolan's head, and arguing that a confrontation close to the time of a death cannot simply be waved away. The independent autopsy commissioned by the family ultimately described the cause and manner of death as undetermined and noted areas of soft tissue discoloration that warranted further inquiry. That leaves a narrow but crucial distinction. The medical findings do not establish the witness's fight story, and they do not explain Nolan's death away either. A claim of a fight has to survive both the evidence that supports it and the evidence that appears to resist it. Put your answer in the comments on one evidence question. If a verified, time-stamped video placed Nolan on Horn Island after 4:30 p.m., would that materially change how you read the departing group's timeline? Yes or no? That 4:30 p.m. marker is where much of the case bends. The young men interviewed by Tatum said their boats left Horn Island around that time after trouble with a 22-foot Triton. Their Life 360 data was presented as showing the movement from the island back toward shore. Video shown in those interviews depicts a crowded boat during the towing episode and people dealing with the vessel as it took on water. The data can support movement. It can help establish where a phone or person carrying a device traveled, but GPS does not answer a different question. Where was Nolan at the exact moment those boats pulled away? Grace kept returning to that point. If Nolan can be reliably placed alive on the island around 5 or 6 p.m. after the others left, that fact would shift attention toward the period after departure. If he cannot, then the claim that the departing group was already gone when Nolan was last seen rests on a disputed premise. The assistance call complicates that timeline rather than settling it. Wyatt has been identified as the person who placed the CTOW call and gave coordinates while the Triton was taking on water. He was also reported to have confirmed that everyone was on board. His grandfather, described by CTOW personnel as the owner, later called to cancel assistance because help had arrived. Bart Edmiston Jr.'s attorney said Bart was asked to help with the bilge problem, got onto the transom, assisted with removing a plug so water could drain while the vessel moved, then returned to the boat he was piloting and helped tow the Triton. That is one documented explanation for the frantic boat activity. It is not, by itself, an explanation for Nolan's absence. The material circulating around the case also gives conflicting time references for the CTOW episode. One account places the call near 3 p.m. Other discussion ties the sinking and towing sequence to the later departure window around 4:30. The available material does not resolve that difference cleanly. An exact timeline cannot be built by forcing incompatible clocks to agree. Then there is the boat name problem. Warren Hudson told Nolan's mother that he had gone out on a 24-foot tide line. Mississippi Department of Marine Resources paperwork, discussed in the case, reportedly referred to a tide craft during a July 8 search. A diving instructor compared the difference to investigators intending to examine one make of vehicle but examining another. The analogy is easy to understand, but the conclusion still has to be careful. A paperwork discrepancy does not automatically prove that officials searched the wrong physical boat. It does create a verification problem. If the vessel was misidentified only on paper, the GPS and search may still relate to the correct boat. If a different vessel was actually examined, the value of that data changes completely. That is why the boat name is not a trivia question. It is a chain of identification question. The same discipline has to be applied to the video of the towing scene. Tatum argued that with so many people around, the idea that a body could have been lying unnoticed on a boat was implausible. The counterpoint is narrower and stronger than any accusation. The video only shows what the camera shows during that window. It cannot establish Nolan's location before the clip began. It cannot establish what happened after the boats separated. It cannot turn a crowded deck into proof of every event that occurred off camera. The video is useful precisely where it is fixed in time and space, and useless where people ask it to answer questions outside the frame. That is the pattern running through this investigation. Evidence keeps becoming powerful for one proposition, then getting stretched into a conclusion it cannot carry. Nolan was 18, a college athlete, and a young man whose family expected him to come back from a holiday outing with friends. The crisis did not begin for his mother with an autopsy or a television panel. It began with a phone call. Warren has said he called her at about 11:07 p.m. on July 4th and asked whether she had seen or spoken with Nolan. She has described the same call. He told her that Nolan had stayed on Horn Island with a girl named Katie and that the others had left. The moment she understood that the group did not know where her son was, routine questions became urgent ones. What was he wearing? Which boat had he been on? Who had his belongings? Who had his phone? When had anyone actually seen him? The released text exchange between Nolan's mother and Warren is revealing, but not in the simplistic way online arguments often present it. The material gives two different times for an early message about Nolan's father coming to retrieve a key, one version around 2:24 a.m. and another around 4 a.m. That conflict alone is a warning against pretending the screenshots create a perfect minute-by-minute clock. By early afternoon on July 5th, Nolan's mother asked what kind of sunglasses he had been wearing. Warren answered that he was pretty sure they were Ray-Bans. At 5:15 p.m., he sent an update saying the group had searched that morning and that he had been in contact with the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. Later, when asked for boat information, he gave the descriptions of the Triton and the 24-foot tide line. On July 6th, Nolan's mother asked about collecting Nolan's belongings from Jack's house. A much longer message from Warren did not appear until July 20, the day of the funeral, when he wrote that Nolan had been one of his best friends since 8th grade, and explained that he did not want his presence at the funeral to become a distraction. The delays in that thread can feel unsettling, especially when placed against a missing person emergency. But delay is not proof of guilt. The stronger question is what those messages establish about communication. Warren answered concrete questions when they were asked. He also appears not to have maintained constant proactive contact with the family during some of the earliest hours. The screenshots include a system notice that Nolan's mother unsent a message, but the content is unavailable. Nobody can responsibly build a theory out of words that cannot be seen. The same goes for the emotional interpretation of the messages. A short reply can reflect evasion, confusion, exhaustion, fear, ordinary texting habits, or something else entirely. Text length is not forensic evidence. What matters are the factual statements inside the exchange and whether they match other records. One of those statements did not remain consistent. Warren initially described Nolan's shorts as black, or very dark, while early official descriptions and photographs were later said to show blue swim trunks. Warren later explained that he was trying to piece together the clothing from memory and that a photograph corrected the color. The correction matters, but again, it has two possible meanings. A mistaken color can be an ordinary memory error in a chaotic search. It can also test how reliable a person's precise recollection is when the same person gives highly specific details about times, locations, boat sizes, and events. The clothing discrepancy is therefore useful as a calibration point, not as a verdict. The phone creates a more consequential conflict. Warren has said that during the late-night call, he told Nolan's mother the group already had Nolan's phone. Nolan's family and people working with them have emphasized that they located the device through Life 360 and then arranged to recover it, describing the process as less direct than that account suggests. Both versions cannot be treated as identical. The difference may come down to what was said, when it was said, and what the family understood in the moment. The record available here does not settle it. What it does show is that Nolan's phone became one of the most important objects in the entire investigation, because it could contain location history, communications, photographs, app data, or other digital information capable of testing human memory against a device. Subscribe if you want careful updates focused on what the evidence establishes as this case moves toward a grand jury. By August, the phone had become a dispute about process as much as content. The family said it had never refused a forensic examination. Their lawyers described concerns about chain of custody, examination methods, who would be present, and how to prevent later arguments over selective extraction or handling. They said an agreement for a joint examination had been reached during a July 15 meeting. Letters dated August 11th, 13, and 17 proposed dates between August 18th and August 21st requested at least 12 hours notice so the family's experts could attend, and suggested a digital forensics laboratory at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College with possible FBI participation. The district attorney's office, meanwhile, had publicly pressed for the phone to be surrendered and, according to the family's account, gave a deadline of less than 48 hours while the family was out of state. The family characterized that demand as unreasonable and answered with the jointly supervised proposal. The material available here does not establish that the proposed examination had been completed. That procedural fight sits beside a broader dispute over what prosecutors can say publicly. On August 18, 2026, District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath issued a formal statement explaining why her office would not release many details. She said prosecutors do not have the same freedom as private citizens to discuss witness cooperation, testing, letters, verification decisions, or the evidence expected to go before a grand jury. She argued that public restraint protects the investigation, prevents influence on witnesses, and preserves fairness. She also rejected the idea that a person becomes more trustworthy simply by speaking publicly, or that official silence proves corruption. Her stated obligation was to gather the evidence, complete the investigation, and present it to the grand jury. A false claim that circulated online shows how quickly that vacuum can distort basic facts. Posts suggested that McElrath's husband was an active FBI agent involved in the Wells investigation. The material in this case says that claim is wrong. His career was in local and state law enforcement, including years as chief investigator for the district attorney's office, and he retired in 2019. He attended the FBI National Academy in 2012, a professional development program for law enforcement leaders. Attending that academy does not make someone an FBI special agent. The distinction is simple, yet the rumor fused two true facts: his academy attendance and FBI assistance in aspects of the investigation, into a false conclusion. That is exactly how misinformation becomes persuasive. It borrows real pieces and assembles them into a structure the pieces do not support. The same risk appears in the sudden arrival of new witnesses. After weeks of debate, several new accounts surfaced in a short period. Some appeared first in online programs or messages. Some reinforced a theory that Nolan was alive after the main group left Horn Island. Others described conflict. The anonymous woman who said she saw the phone argument is the most consequential because she also claimed video existed. But every late witness creates a second question beyond whether the person is sincere. What information had that witness already encountered? Repeated media coverage can contaminate memory without a coordinated plot. People hear details from friends, watch interviews, read posts, then later become less certain about which details they personally observed. The case material itself raises this co-witness problem and emphasizes why early, separated, non-leading interviews are so valuable. A witness can be completely honest and still be wrong. That does not mean late witnesses should be dismissed. It means they should be tested harder. The anonymous woman's account has identifiable pressure points. Does the video exist? Does its metadata establish when it was recorded? Does the image quality permit a reliable identification of Nolan? Does it show an argument, a physical fight, or something less clear? Does it match the geography of the island and the known boat movements? Did she describe the same event before the details became widely discussed? Can her husband independently authenticate the recording? And does any other person place the same people together at the same time? A real recording could answer several of those questions in seconds. A story about a recording cannot. That difference between evidence and a story about evidence is especially important because the case also contains an anonymous handwritten letter. The letter circulated online with no verified authorship and no supporting proof. It claims a completely different sequence in which Nolan died earlier, his remains were stored in a cool location, and his body was returned to Horn Island between roughly 3 o'clock and 5 a.m. on July 6. It also advances a motive involving conflict inside the friend group and makes accusations about threats and fear. None of those central claims has been established in the material available here. No verified storage location, no authenticated writer, no confirmed transfer window, no documented chain tying named individuals to the alleged scheme. The letter can be discussed as an example of what people are circulating. It cannot be promoted into the case timeline simply because it offers a neat explanation for unresolved facts. Its appeal is understandable because the condition and location of Nolan's remains have generated real questions. A park ranger found Nolan at the northwest tip of Horn Island on the morning of July 6th, around 8:45. Brian Trasher, involved in the search effort from an aircraft, described seeing law enforcement gathering near the shoreline and what appeared to be Nolan lying face down. He repeatedly stressed the limitation of his vantage point. He was hundreds of feet in the air. He could see the back of the body, but not make a close medical inspection. From that height, he said he did not see obvious bloating. He also said the body did not appear disproportionate in the way he might expect after floating, while acknowledging that Nolan had been in warm water for a relatively short period and had a low body mass. Online analyses took that observation much further. Some argued that a person who died before entering the water could retain air in the lungs and remain buoyant, potentially floating face down without first sinking. Others emphasized the strong currents around the area, sometimes called the washing machine, and argued that hydraulic forces could move a body regardless of ordinary expectations about buoyancy and decomposition. Those are proposed explanations, not findings that establish Nolan died before entering the water. Trasher's observation from the aircraft cannot determine whether Nolan drowned when he entered the water or whether he had been moved. The independent autopsy did not provide a definitive cause or manner. It reported them as undetermined. That is the medical boundary. Any theory that claims more has to produce evidence beyond the appearance of a body viewed from several hundred feet away. The public behavior of Nolan's acquaintances has also been read through that same lens of suspicion. Several remained quiet publicly for days or weeks, then some appeared in lengthy interviews on Brandon Tatum's platform. They presented photographs, video, phone call material, and their account of July 4. Critics focused on why that platform was chosen and on Tatum's political reputation, especially in a case involving a young black man whose family later received support from prominent civil rights lawyers. Tatum rejected the idea that his role was racial. He said he was trying to hear both sides and argued that Nolan's death should not be turned into a racial narrative without evidence. The optics became part of the controversy, but optics are not a substitute for evaluating the exhibits and statements themselves. Those interviews did create new factual claims that could be checked. The group said Horn Island was crowded, not an isolated location occupied by only Nolan and 3 white friends. They described a mixed group and many other people nearby. They showed the Triton during the towing problem. They said Life 360 data matched their departure. They disputed enhanced versions of the Sea Tow recording that circulated online, calling altered or amplified versions fake or unreliable. The original audio released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources was described as difficult to discern in places, and the family sought independent analysis. That distinction matters enormously. Audio enhancement can make faint speech easier to hear, but it can also invite listeners to hear words they already expect. When people disagree about a muffled phrase, the answer is not volume, it is authentication, methodology, and comparison with the original file. 2 men, Bart Edmiston Jr. and Wyatt, drew particular public attention because of the boat episode and because they did not participate in the same extended interview series as some others. Bart's lawyer said his client's role was practical assistance with the failing boat, and that he had cooperated with investigators. Wyatt was identified as the caller who provided coordinates to Sea Tow and answered dispatch questions. The later cancellation of assistance by the boat owner's family member has been described as unusual, but an unusual decision is not automatically a sinister one if private help had already arrived. Video from the towing sequence reportedly shows about 7 people on the Triton, and Nolan is not visible in that footage. That is significant for one narrow reason. It confirms his absence from what the camera captured. It does not establish whether he had been on that vessel minutes earlier. It does not prove where he was on Horn Island. It does not establish who last saw him. The family's side gained additional institutional support when the NOC announced around August 17 that its general counsel's office would join the legal team working with Ben Crump and other attorneys for Nolan's family. NIOACP leadership argued that the family deserved a complete accounting and criticized any early tendency to describe the death as an accident before the investigation was complete. The organization also pressed for transparency and emphasized the racial context in which deaths of young black people can become matters of national concern. That intervention increased pressure on local officials, but it did not establish foul play. The most defensible reading is narrower. A major civil rights organization concluded that the investigation required close scrutiny and legal support for the family. The family has been particularly critical of early statements that appeared to minimize the possibility of foul play. That criticism became more forceful after the independent autopsy returned an undetermined cause and manner of death. An undetermined finding does not mean homicide. It means the examination did not establish a definitive cause and manner from the information available. That difference is fundamental. A person can oppose the phrase accidental drowning without claiming murder. A prosecutor can continue investigating without announcing a criminal theory. A family can demand more testing without proving that another person caused the death. The gap between those positions has too often been flattened online into two camps, accident or killing, when the actual evidentiary posture remains less satisfying and more difficult. And that brings the case back to the 90-minute problem. If the boats left around 4:30 p.m., and if a credible independent witness can place Nolan alive on Horn Island close to 6 o'clock, the later sighting would create a major exclusion point for people whose movements are independently verified elsewhere. If that later placement is unreliable, the timeline opens backward again. Who last had direct contact with Nolan? Who knew he intended to stay? Who knew where his phone was? When was he first recognized as missing? What exactly did the Sea Tao caller mean by everyone being on board? Was that statement limited to everyone expected on the troubled boat, everyone in a particular party, or literally every person who had traveled with the group? Language that sounds conclusive in a dispatch call can become ambiguous once the category of everyone is challenged. There is also the young woman called Katie. The anonymous witness tied the alleged dispute to a young woman and said someone was telling the men to stop. Warren told Nolan's mother that Nolan had stayed on the island with a girl named Katie. Tatum said he had seen Katie's text messages and that those messages did not mention a fight. Other online posts attempted to place Katie away from Horn Island later, using time-stamped photographs or videos from Ocean Springs. If those time and location records are authentic, they could help test the claim that Nolan remained with her. But even a verified image of Katie somewhere else at 6:02 p.m. would not automatically tell us where Nolan was at 5:45, who he was with, or how he entered the water. Every timestamp is a pin, not a complete route. That is why the late witness's video matters more than her dramatic warning message. A warning that someone could spend life in prison is an opinion. A recording with metadata is evidence. A memory of an argument is testimony. A clear image showing who was present is corroboration. A description of a physical fight can be tested against injuries, other witnesses, and the sequence of movements after the fight. The case does not need another confident narrator. It needs evidence that can survive hostile questions. The district attorney has said the matter will be presented to a Jackson County grand jury and described that step as ordinary for deaths that are neither natural nor straightforward non-criminal traffic accidents. The state autopsy and other evidentiary materials were expected to remain sealed until that process. McElrath's August statement asked the public to allow investigators to complete the work without forcing premature disclosure. Her critics answered that secrecy surrounding the grand jury does not require silence about every procedural question. The disagreement will not be solved by volume. It will be solved, if it is solved at all, by whether the investigators can show that the critical evidence was collected, preserved, tested, and presented coherently. That includes Nolan's phone. The phone is one of the few objects in this case capable of carrying its own record of movement and communication. But even digital data has limits. Locatia services can be disabled, imprecise, delayed, or tied to the device rather than the person. Deletion does not automatically prove concealment. An absent message does not prove a conversation never occurred. A recovered artifact still has to be interpreted in context. Yet compared with months of people arguing over who remembered what, a properly handled forensic extraction could narrow certain questions with far less dependence on memory. That is why the chain of custody dispute matters. The family wanted their experts present. The district attorney wanted access. The conflict was not whether the phone should matter. It was how the examination should happen and who would be able to verify the process afterward. If this case matters to you, keep the focus on evidence, not accusation. Because Nolan Wells's case has accumulated enough accusation already, a late witness says there was a fight. A forensic expert says the documented injuries do not show the blunt force pattern he would expect from the fight as described. A second autopsy leaves cause and manner undetermined. A towing video supports a boat emergency sequence, but does not place Nolan. A Life 360 track supports movement, but not every person's location. A boat name in a report conflicts with the boat name given in messages. A mother and a friend agree on a late-night call, but differ over what was communicated about the phone. An anonymous letter offers an elaborate concealment theory with no verified author or supporting proof. A prosecutor says silence protects the process. Critics say silence leaves too much room for misinformation. All of those facts can exist at the same time without one theory winning by default. The hardest part is accepting how little one dramatic detail can actually prove. The red discoloration at the back of Nolan's head is not a homicide finding. The lack of obvious blunt force trauma is not proof that no confrontation occurred. The absence of bloating observed from an aircraft is not a time of death calculation. The fact that Nolan is missing from towing footage is not proof that he had already been left behind. The fact that friends hired lawyers is not evidence of guilt. The fact that attorneys threatened defamation suits is not evidence of innocence. The Nakib's involvement is not proof of a crime. The district attorney's restraint is not proof of corruption. And a witness saying she has a video is not the same as investigators possessing, authenticating, and dating that video. What would move the case? A verified timestamp showing Nolan alive after the boats left would move it. A verified recording of the alleged argument would move it. Authenticated device data that fixes Nolan's phone to a location at a meaningful time could move it. A reconciled record identifying exactly which boats were searched and what GPS systems were examined could move it. A reliable reconstruction of the Sea-Tow call and towing sequence could move it. Autopsy evidence tying an injury to a mechanism of death would move it. None of those conclusions should be announced before the underlying proof is available. There is a human reason to insist on that standard. Nolan's mother was not asking for a theory when she began texting about sunglasses, swim trunks, boat models, keys, and belongings. She was trying to locate her son. His friends were not abstract figures in a puzzle either. Some had known him for years. One message described him as a best friend since 8th grade. Their actions deserve scrutiny because they were among the people closest to the last known events of his day. But scrutiny is not a license to assign guilt without proof. The family deserves answers. The people being accused deserve conclusions grounded in evidence. Both can be true. The investigation now sits between two failures that look very different but cause the same damage. The first failure would be closing the case around an early assumption before the unresolved evidence is tested. The second would be letting public suspicion harden into a verdict before investigators establish a crime. Nolan's case cannot be protected by choosing one error over the other. It has to survive both. That means separating a verified fact from a persuasive possibility, then doing it again and again, even when the possibility is emotionally satisfying. And until they do, the most responsible conclusion is not that nothing happened. It is that the decisive sequence has not been established. Nolan went to Horn Island with friends. His group encountered a boat emergency and left the island. Nolan did not return with them. His mother learned late that night that his whereabouts were unknown. His body was recovered on Horn Island on July 6. The independent autopsy did not determine a cause or manner of death. The investigation moved toward a grand jury, while the family, civil rights advocates, attorneys for Nolan's acquaintances, online commentators, and prosecutors fought over what the existing evidence means. Those are the fixed points. Every serious theory has to fit them without inventing what happens between them. That is why one unverified video carries so much weight. If it exists, if it is authentic, if it can be dated, and if it clearly shows Nolan, it could convert an argument about memory into a fact about time. It could also fail every one of those tests and leave the case exactly where it was. The next decisive step may come from whatever can finally be fixed to a person, a place, and a clock.